You can judge a society by how it treats its most vulnerable people, and by that measure, the United States is in this moment failing pretty badly. Most of us agree that in some way or another, our nation's immigration system is broken and has been for many years. But what sets democracy apart is a commitment to fairness, liberty, equality, human rights, dignity, and due process. Our immigration system must be fixed, but there are humane ways to fix it, ways that don't involve vanishing people off the streets and sending alleged gang members to El Salvador without any due process. Now, you may be amazed at the speed with which this is all happening, and for that you can thank technology. Rounding up immigrants using technology and data has become a booming industry in this country. Our immigration policy is increasingly being carried out with the help of private corporations, companies that surveil people with little transparency and very little accountability. And when you privatize a system that once operated under public oversight, you don't just shift responsibility, you create distance. Dangerous blind spots in a system that's being redesigned to look the other way. ICE recently signed a new $30 million deal with Palantir, a surveillance and artificial intelligence company co-founded by Trump mega donor Peter Thiel. The contract was published in the Federal Register, and it was first reported by Business Insider. Palantir has been a contractor for ICE since 2011. Now, I should remind you, Palantir has a lot of contracts with a lot of parts of the government. But according to the new contract, Palantir wants to provide ICE with brand new capabilities. According to the contract, Palantir's tech will help ICE create a mass surveillance system, what it calls, quote, an end-to-end immigration life cycle from identification to removal. According to Wired, the tool would help ICE choose whom to deport, giving special priority to those who have overstayed their visas. ICE expects a prototype by September. Since Trump was elected, Palantir stock is up more than 90%. But Palantir isn't the only tech firm profiting from Trump's immigration policies. ICE, whose director recently said that he wants the agency to run like, quote, Amazon Prime, but with human beings, also recently extended contracts with GEO Group. GEO is not just a tech firm. Primarily, it's one of the largest private prison networks in the country. It also makes digital tools like ankle monitors, smartwatches, and tracking apps to surveil immigrants inside the United States. The tracking program that GEO oversees was created to keep tabs on unauthorized immigrants who face potential deportation. In theory, it was a good money-saving idea. Rather than being placed in detention centers, these immigrants receive these tracking devices and must quickly respond to alerts to confirm their whereabouts. I think we can probably agree that monitoring undocumented immigrants who could be awaiting a hearing for years is better for them and the taxpayer than incarcerating them. It gives migrants the opportunity to live and work potentially productive lives, even though their movement is limited. But according to new reporting by the New York Times, these GEO products are now being used to aid Trump's deportation efforts by providing immigrants' whereabouts to ICE. The New York Times tells the story of the Honduran immigrant who arrived in the United States in 2022. Quote, officials ordered him to use a government-issued app as part of an immigrant surveillance program. At least once a week, the immigrant, a former police officer in Honduras who was living in Louisiana, would take a selfie through the facial recognition-powered app to confirm his identity and location. By trading some of his privacy, he avoided being put in a detention center and obtained a work permit. In February, he received a message, report to an immigration office so the tracking technology could be updated. When he arrived, federal agents were waiting. They handcuffed him and put him on a vehicle bound for a detention center where he has been ever since, end quote. According to the New York Times, no figures have been released about the number of arrests made as a result of information gleaned from GEO Group's digital monitoring program. GEO stock, by the way, stock has doubled since the election. Now, whether using data analytics and mass surveillance for immigration enforcement is ethical is up for debate. But the real issue is that it's happening at a time when the whole system is already marked by lawlessness and cruelty. For more on this, I'm joined by Caitlin Dickerson, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter at The Atlantic, where she covers immigration, and Petra Molnar, an attorney, co-creator of Migration and Technology Monitor, author of The Walls Have Eyes, Surviving Migration in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being with us. Caitlin, let me just start with you. What's your sense of technology and tracking as it relates to immigration? There are I can hear some really sensible arguments for it. But I don't think I imagined this is how it was going to be used.
Ali, I think you were right that there's some nuance in this conversation, in that for the last couple of administrations, people working within DHS who wanted to try to make the system more humane and pull more people out of detention centers were turning toward these types of technologies as an alternative and using them to make the argument people are still showing up for court, still going through their immigration processes if they're allowed to simply check in on an app. But as you said, it's being turned on its head. And I think, there's a big conversation to be had about technology and immigration generally. But my view of this is that it's one of many, many tools that the Trump administration is turning to right now, right? So it's not just the use of these apps that they're using to arrest people. People who are showing up for their regular ICE check-ins that they do every 6 months or every year are being arrested. People who are getting a phone call being told that they need to come in to update some paperwork are being arrested. The IRS data is being turned over to immigration enforcement authorities. And so, of course, they're going to use the technology here too. But I think what did really strike me is some reporting by my colleague Nick Miroff actually this week, who said that he spoke to Tom Homan, Trump's border czar. Homan said he'd been on the phone for days, basically being inundated with calls from companies like Palantir and Deloitte, who are super eager to get in on this action to try to help the government round up as many people as possible. And Congress is looking to hand DHS a huge amount of money to be able to make business with these organizations.
Petra, it's not simply, in the case of Geo, they can track you, like physical. It's GPS and satellite and phones and all that. They can literally figure out where you are, and they hand that information to the government. We talk about Palantir, it's more sophisticated. It's algorithms, right? They can figure out what you might do or what might happen. You've thought a lot about this. That there's a real danger zone here. I mean, normally we read about it in these dystopian novels, but we're going down that road with some of these companies.
That's right, Ali. And I actually think we're not just going down that road, but we are already there. I've been trying to understand the interplay of technology and migration since about 2017. I'm a lawyer and an anthropologist, and I've actually gone to places where this technology is tested out. Places in Arizona, for example, right at the US-Mexico border, that has essentially become a surveillance dragnet. And so now we are clearly seeing the latest manifestation of how this interplay is actually working. Essentially, at every single point of a person's migration journey, they are interacting with some sort of technology, whether that is surveillance, whether that is predictive analytics, social media scraping, and also artificial intelligence that's increasingly making its way into an already very complicated decision-making system that's discretionary, like at the border and in asylum applications, but also I think highlights that ultimately these are not just questions about technology, but they're questions of power and who has it.
Power and money and ethics and whether this is all, whether we're letting lawlessness get away with a few things. I want to ask you both to stick around for a moment. We'll continue this conversation on the other side. Caitlin Dickerson and Petra Molnar. All right, we're back with Caitlin Dickerson and Petra Molnar to discuss the tech sector's growing role in carrying out Trump's mass deportation plans. But Caitlin, I got to just do an aside for a second. It's Easter. Happy Easter to both of you. In the old days, as reporters in normal times, you would show the Pope and the Queen and read the president's, whatever messages. I don't subscribe to Truth Social, but the president has put out an Easter wish, and I'd like to read it to you and get your comments on it. Happy Easter to all, including the radical left lunatics who are fighting and scheming so hard to bring murderers, drug lords, dangerous prisoners, the mentally insane and well-known MS-13 gang members and wife beaters back into our country. Happy Easter also to the weak and effective judges and law enforcement officials who are allowing this sinister attack on our nation to continue, an attack so violent that it will never be forgotten. Sleepy Joe Biden purposefully allowed millions of criminals to enter our country, totally unvetted and unchecked, through an open borders policy that will go down in history as the single most calamitous attack ever perpetrated on America. He was by far our worst and most incompetent president, a man who had absolutely no idea what he was doing. But to him, and to the person that ran the manipulated the auto pen, perhaps our real president, and to all the people who cheated in the 2020 presidential election in order to get this highly destructive moron elected, I wish you, with great love, sincerity, and affection, a very happy Easter. I only do that, Caitlin, to discuss with you the framing we've had around immigration. You and I have talked about immigration for years in this country, broken, lots of fault to spread around for it. We're not even trying to go in the right direction here.
No, I mean, that was a shocking message, not the kind that you're used to hearing on a religious holiday. So it just took me a beat there to process. But, it stands in stark contrast to reporting of mine in the Atlantic this week I wrote a story about half a dozen people who've been taken into ICE custody, who are being pursued for deportation, who have no criminal record at all. One of them is a chaplain who legally sought asylum and is waiting for a resolution in his case. He's a homeowner with young children. There were 3 men in my story who were business owners who have years-long documented history of paying taxes. Again, they all have American-born children. A woman, a green card holder who's lived in the United States for more than 50 years, who is now in ICE custody and will be there until at least July. She's 64 years old, and she was picked up based on the one criminal infraction she ever had, which was 24 years ago, a conviction for fraud for which she never even served time. She's lived in the United States since she was a teenager and is about to start collecting Social Security and retire. And so the story, I focused on half a dozen people, but I could have written about hundreds and hundreds. ICE's own data shows that more than half the people they've arrested since Trump took office have no criminal record at all. And so I really tried to focus in the story about how the immigrants themselves were surprised to find themselves in ICE's clutches, because they heard what the president said when he campaigned and what he said consistently since then, including in this Easter message, that he's focusing on this kind of caricature of evil, people who have very clear history of violence and threaten public safety. And so they themselves never thought that they would be arrested. One man told me he actually tried to get out of the way when he saw ICE agents coming toward him because he thought, think it was for him. Surely they couldn't be coming for me. But the reality is that most immigrants in this country, vast majority, just don't meet that picture that Donald Trump is painting. And those are the people who are being swept up now.
Petra, part of the problem with the commercialization of these surveillance technologies for use in immigration is a lack of accountability and transparency. They're not the government. We don't have a press room where we can question them. Not that this government gives us tons of answers on stuff, but at least we have the right to ask them. Geo Group just won't comment. Palantir doesn't offer comment when people ask them about these things.
Yeah, Ali, that's right. And that's one of the key issues to pay attention to in this growing rise of border surveillance and technology. The fact that accountability and transparency is just not at the center of this whole system. And paying attention to the power brokers like the private sector, like Geo Group, like Palantir is crucial to try and understand what's happening. But it's very difficult because, of course, there is no commitment to transparency and accountability. It's very difficult to get access to the procurement documents, the contracts, just even the scope of what is being done. And I think so much of it, though, also goes back to this kind of framing that we're talking about here, framing migration as a problem to solve. And all of a sudden, if you are a private sector actor, you will come up with lucrative solutions to this so-called problem. And that those solutions are surveillance, robo-dogs, drones, AI lie detectors. Borders are a big business at the expense of people's lives.
Yeah, and in fairness, these companies do say we don't set the policy. We're just helping the government enforce their own policies. But we should all know that that's actually happening. Thanks to both of you. It's a great conversation that we can have. I think we have to have much more of. Caitlin Dickerson, investigative reporter at The Atlantic. Petra Molnar, co-creator of Migration and Technology Monitor and author of The Walls Have Eyes, Surviving Migration in the Age of Artificial Intelligence.